Okay, let's get started right away because I have a feeling we're going to have lots to talk about. Welcome to the AGO. My name is Amanda and I'm an art educator here at the museum. And today I'm joined by two of my colleagues from the conservation department, and they're going to tell us a little bit more about what they do. So I'm pretty excited to hear what they have to say. But let's start with our land acknowledgement first. So the AGO is on Mississauga territory, Mississauga. It is also governed by a treaty between the Mississauga of the Credit and the Canadian government. Toronto is Mississauga territory. It has also been occupied by other Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and Wendat confederacies. So we have got I'm very excited to hear a little bit more about what both my colleagues have to say about art conservation, because I don't think that finishing your painting or your sculpture or your performance even is perhaps the last moment, the last change that happens to an artwork. So I'm really excited to hear a little bit more about the art and science of conservation. So would you both mind introducing yourselves to our group today?
Sure. So my name is Sherry. I'm the conservator for contemporary art at the Art Gallery of Ontario. I have a background, my undergraduate degree was in microbiology and zoology. And then I did a big turnaround and went back to school, did a little bit of art history and art studio. And after that, I was able to enter the art conservation program at Queen's University.
Hi, I'm Sjoukje, and I'm the Assistant Conservator Contemporary Art here at the Art Gallery of Ontario. I'm from the Netherlands. I did my master in Amsterdam, where you have a master program specialized in the conservation of art objects, and I'm specialized in contemporary art conservation. My background is more in art history, so I have an undergraduate in art history and rolled into art conservation and followed some science programs, and that's how I ended up as a conservator eventually.
Very interesting. Okay, thanks for joining me, Sherry and Sjoukje. So I'm going to just start with the very basic question, because I think there's probably a lot of people wondering it, and it's, what is conservation? What does a conservation department at a museum or an art gallery even do?
Well, rather than reading the slide, I thought perhaps Sjoukje and I can just talk a little bit about, well, we'll get into what we do a little bit, but this summarizes in a very general way what art conservation is about. We work with many different collaborators within and outside of the art gallery or a museum if we worked at a museum. There are many fields that are related to conservation and that we work together. You could, an archivist, a librarian, curators, installers, and HVAC specialists, electricians, audiovisual people. So there's many different fields that all work together with conservation, and especially with contemporary art, because the media and the materials we work with are so diverse. So it's impossible for us to know everything. We know a lot. We know a little bit about a lot of things, and then we'll work with other specialists to help us interpret, examine, analyze, and maybe eventually treat the object itself.
Very good.
We can go to the next slide. Yeah, so here at the AGO we have 8 conservators working. We have conservators specialized in paintings, in photographs, in objects, paper and books. And Sherry and I are taking care of the contemporary art collection. So as a conservator, you specialize in a specific art object or material. And what we are doing mostly here in the museum is preservation of the art objects. So that is when the art objects are in the exhibitions or in the museum itself or in storage, we are taking care of it and making sure that an art object stays stable. Another thing that we can do is when an art work needs to be treated, we can do the actual treatment, and often that means more like we do like a minimal intervention. So we do cleaning if it's dusty, or if it needs to go on loan and something is broken off, we can adhere back. And that is also another part of our job as well, is that we can also do more like active restoration, which is, for example, if you have a painting and it has a yellowed varnish, we will take the varnish off, or yeah, it's more like real hands-on. Oh, here you can see us in action. Sherry, do you want to say something about?
Sure. So treatments are always tailored to the needs of the object. Sometimes it's really simple. You can see on part of the screen where Xiaoqi and I are working together to stabilize a textile object. So that involved some stitching. And it was a contemporary artist, so we were working with the artist to establish how best to stabilize this particular textile object. And then in the bottom corner, you see Xiaoqi with what we thought was kind of a funny picture. It was an object on loan to us for an exhibition, and our role there would be condition reporting and ensuring that the object is stable and ready to go on display. So this was from, what's that? Oh, the Hellboy movie, actually. So it's this enormous gun. It was a movie prop, but we had it on display as part of the Del Toro exhibition a couple of years ago. And then in the top left corner, you see me working on this infestation piece, Muscled Moor by Simon Starling. And this work was enormously complicated. So, and took actually several years for us to treat this artwork. So our treatment can be very simple, or it can be incredibly complicated and take many different steps over many different years.
Very interesting. It sounds almost like you need to have a little bit of artistic skill and ability, you know, by sewing, maybe stitching, or I don't know, maybe with the studio light, you even need to know a little bit about the electronics. It sounds like there's a lot of room for being really creative in some ways.
You're right, Amanda. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about art conservation is we touch on so many different skill sets. And sometimes I consider myself a generalist. I know a lot about, or a little bit about a lot of things. And depending upon the needs of the object, I may then dive much deeper into different techniques and materials to learn as much as I can before I even start a treatment.
Yeah.
But within conservation, there's even the opportunity to become a material specialist. So someone may specialize in architecture and the built heritage. Someone may specialize in just bronze or wooden objects. There's a whole range of things that people can do. I feel like my job is really tailored to the needs of the collection at the Art Gallery of Ontario. In another institution, I probably would have taken a slightly different path.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I just forgot we wanted to mention that if any of our viewers today have any questions for you guys, you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And then we can pose your questions and hopefully get some real-time answers as we're doing this presentation. So we flipped to the next slide already. So I'm going to ask sort of a general question. I know you've prepared these great slides, but it's sort of like what, I'm looking for maybe a specific example of a conservation project that you worked on, and maybe some of the fun things or interesting parts of it to you.
Sure. So Xiaoqi and I were talking about this, and we thought we'd feature Trans Am Apocalypse #3 by John Scott. John is a Toronto artist. Sometimes we we acquire objects knowing that they need treatment, but the opportunity to treat it may not come about for a few years. So when Trans Am Apocalypse was taken into the collection, I knew that it needed work. I knew that it needed to be stabilized. But given the size, a full-size car, there aren't many opportunities or spaces where we can work on this. So this was requested for loan. by another institution, and the AGO wanted to support that loan, and this was the perfect opportunity to begin the treatment project on this car. So fortunately, I work with very talented people at the AGO, and one of my colleagues was an auto mechanic. So we were able to go off into off-site storage and actually start assessing this object, because it is a sculpture, but it's also a car. So the reality of the material and the object itself imposes certain ways of working. And one of those things is our sources we have lots of sources for conservation grade materials and chemicals that we need to, work on these objects. But sometimes you have to go to a place like Canadian Tire and buy a set of tires for your sculpture. So, these are the fun things that we sometimes engage with. So with Trans Am Apocalypse, we have the third version. The first version was actually destroyed by the artist. He had no place to keep it, and no one was interested. It was a critical success, but unfortunately, no one was interested in acquiring a full-size Trans Am. So he had no choice. The National Gallery of Canada approached him and said, "Hey, we're really interested in that car." So he created Trans Am Apocalypse #2. And then eventually he created Trans Am Apocalypse #3, and that's the one that's in the collection of the AGO.
Very cool.
So for this one, because we needed the space, I couldn't possibly bring this. We started the treatment actually at the Art Gallery of Hamilton, who was the venue that borrowed the car. And Shauki and I were there for about a week just doing stabilization of the lifting paint layers. The treatment wasn't finished. So when it was coming back to the Art Gallery of Ontario, we found this gallery space, and we decided to turn it into conservation on public display, which I really enjoy doing because it engages our visitors in a really positive way, and they can ask questions, although that it can be very disruptive for my work. So I just have a little thing saying, if I'm wearing my earbuds, I really need to focus on the treatment. And then I try to have time, where I dedicate to just answering questions. So for something like this, it's a challenge on how we treat it, where we treat it, how extensively we can treat it, where we keep it, like where we store it long term. And if we go to the next slide, there you can see. So this is not on the left. That's not our usual way of transporting an artwork, but it is what we needed to do to transport this sculpture. So we hired a company that specializes in moving automobiles. They are actually really wonderful. They transport all kinds of vehicles, collector cars, and they treated our sculpture with the delicacy that it needed. And then on the right, you see it's a storage location. And because this work is not going to be used in the near future, it's stored up incredibly high. And so they built a pallet, and I had a custom car cover made for it. And it's safe, it's stored properly in climate control environment.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very neat. Thank you, Sherry.
You're welcome.
So I think we can move on to our next slide.
Okay.
And this one's really quite interesting to me. It looks like you could, you're taking an artwork to the doctor's office. So maybe Shukya or Sherry, whoever wants to, can you tell me a little bit more about what we're looking at in this slide? But then also some of the kinds of interesting technology that you use in your restoration or conservation of artworks.
Sure. Shauki, do you want to start with yours?
Yeah, sure. So there are two things happening here on this slide. So if you look at the two right photos, the top and the bottom one, that's an artwork that was requested for loan, so for an exhibition at the other museum. And when an artwork is requested for an exhibition by another museum, we have to check its condition here in the museum to see if it actually can be shown, and also if it can travel. So in this particular case, this object was very fragile. When we saw it in storage, we had a couple of question marks, and especially about how the artist made this artwork. So what the structure of this artwork was, because we needed to know how the artwork was made and how the structure inside of the artwork was, to make sure if this artwork could travel safely. And by figuring out the structure, we have an X-ray machine here in our HO lab, which is pretty cool, because with this X-ray machine, it's the same if you break a bone, you can just make an X-ray photo and see what's inside of your skin. And that's actually what we are doing here as well. So in the top right photos, you see the object and our X-ray machine. It's quite what you see here is that the tube is, it's from 1960, so it looks quite like a bit funny, but it's still working. And the photo below is the actual X-ray photo. So and what was really, really fun to see was that the artist actually used, you can see like he used wire, but also we found a paper clip on the inside. So something that we couldn't see from the outside, suddenly with an X-ray photo was presented, and it was pretty fun to find this paper clip. So that also showed like the artist was just using whatever he had in his studio to make this artwork. When I saw these photos and when we had like a better idea of what the structure of this artwork was, I could make a decision if this artwork actually could travel, and we decided that it was able to. So yeah, so in that way, X-rays really help us to determine if an object is stable and strong enough and how it will behave.
And then occasionally, we take objects outside of the gallery to find and use pieces of equipment that enable us, again, X-rays. So this is a CT scanner, a computed tomography, and it is in a hospital. And that was the only thing that we could use to really capture the sort of images, the cross-sectional images by X-ray that we wanted to see of this particular object. So this is HMS Bristol. It's a third-rate ship, or was a third-rate ship. It's a model of a third-rate ship from about 1775. And we wanted to get cross-sectional X-rays that then can be reassembled later to get a three-dimensional X-ray image of the interior of this work. And one of our colleagues did something similar with other objects in our collection, the prayer beads. And she worked with researchers and collaborators at Western University with the micro CT scanning to get similar kinds of three-dimensional arrays or pictures of objects in the collection.
Very cool. Yeah, it's really interesting to see technology that I only associate with using on the body, but to see the other ways that it's flexible and can tell us a lot about what the artist needed to use to get an artwork finished, or just to take a closer look inside something.
Exactly.
Yeah. So maybe we can move on to the next slide. And then what I'd really like to know is, what is the most exciting part of your job for you guys? What aspect maybe do you like the most, or really gets your brain ticking?
Well, for me, I find my job, I'm always learning new things, and I love doing that. So we had an artwork that was proposed to be acquired, and the artist was prepared to send it to us fully formed, fully made, already ready to go. But when you start investigating these things, you realize that sometimes that's just not possible with Canadian laws. And in this case, it was with a work by Pierre Huyghe called Untitled. And it's a concrete sculpture with the head completely encased in bee comb. And there are very specific laws about the importation of bee and bee products. So when we spoke with, I think it was a veterinarian who was with Agriculture Canada, it was like, absolutely no. She understood that the artist was going to make sure that this was very clean, that there was no residuals in there, but she just said no. So our alternative was, I worked with the artist studio and we worked with a beekeeper in Toronto, and we helped the bees build the sculpture in Toronto. And so here I am in a beekeeper's outfit. And I love doing it. It took us about 2 summers for the bees to create what the artist felt was representative of his vision. We were liaising with people all over the place, beekeepers, and we actually worked with the staff at the Four Seasons Center for the Performing Arts, because they have a beekeeping operation on the roof. And that's where we installed the sculpture, and the beekeeper there was worked with me very closely. He maintained the health and the welfare of the bees, and I was there as the sort of the in Toronto representative to help the artist see how things were progressing. And then in the slide on the right, you see another outfit that sometimes conservators wear, which is the construction gear. So when the sculpture was ready, here I am, I'm in the middle, and I'm standing with our 2 curators of contemporary art. And we installed this artwork outside for one of the Luminato festivals, and it was there for 3 weeks as an active beehive. And it was very popular, it was very beautiful, and I think this is probably one of the most beautiful things I've ever worked on, and it was because of the live bees. So if we go to the next slide. There it is.
Oh, wow.
So this is Untilled. And it's an incredibly impressive artwork. Pierre's work is all about the intersection of animate and inanimate. So here you have essentially a living system. And how do we, as conservators, preserve and maintain a living system? And in this case, the health and welfare of the bees were very much a part of that process. So here I am learning something completely new, and something in my life I never thought that I would need to do. But in the end, I had a fabulous time, and I learned a lot, and a new respect for bees and all that they do. So it was great.
Really, that's really interesting. I like that you called it a living system, because like I sort of said in my introduction, the painting doesn't, or an artwork doesn't really stop when the last dab of paint or the last bee leaves it. It's still like a living object, and you're kind of the custodian of that living object so that it continues to live.
It does continue.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just got my eye on the time, because I think we've got a couple more questions, but we are running out of time.
Okay.
So maybe if Sukya, if you could answer maybe a little bit about what you are currently working on at the AGO. I think you're at work.
Yeah, I'm at work.
Conservation behind you, yeah.
It's a light and big studio here behind me. So currently I'm working on an upcoming exhibition. It's Studio 54. And Studio 54 was a very famous nightclub in the 1970s. And I think it was only open for 3 years, like very short, but it was at the time like a lot of famous people came there, and when people were going there to dance and party, they were wearing all these very cool and like very unique outfits, and Andy Warhol was around and he made photos. So it was like in New York, it was a very active and exciting nightclub. So the AGO has an exhibition coming up which opens just before Christmas. So if you want in your Christmas holiday going to the museum and see this show, it's going to be pretty exciting. There's lots of light and music, but also what I think is pretty exciting and where I'm working on is all the costumes that are coming. So the dresses and costumes that people were actually wearing in these nightclubs and where they danced in. So in a couple of weeks, me and my colleagues will install these costumes. They are extremely fragile, so they come with mannequins, but we have to dress these mannequins and do this with extremely great care, because these dresses are already like 40 years old now. So yeah, we have to be very careful, but that's something that I'm preparing right now. And yeah, that's something that's coming up soon.
Very cool. I think there's maybe a couple more slides. Let's see what the next one is. Oh yeah, could one of you tell me what's happening in this picture?
So this was during the Kusama Exhibition 2 years ago already, I think. And it was a really big painting actually that came, well, like you can see, it's like extremely long, and we needed all the installers and Sherry and me to handle this artwork, to install it in the vitrine that was on the wall. So you can also see that, you know, literally it's like a lot of hands-on work. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, that's really interesting. Just to see, because like I know when I'm at an art gallery, I don't really see all this work that's obviously going on behind the scenes. And I really like sort of that view getting to peek behind the curtain like this. Thanks for preparing so many amazing images. I think we've got one more slide left. And while we bring it up, if anybody watching has any questions that they'd like to answer, we would really like to hear your thoughts, or this is your opportunity to ask our conservators anything. So please hop in. But could you guys tell me just a little bit more about what some of these links might be able to share with us?
Sure. So the first two is my alma mater at Queen's. Second is Sjoukje's in Amsterdam. If anyone's interested in education in conservation, you could check out those two. Fleming College in Peterborough has a program in collections care. And then we included the Canadian Conservation Institute, if anyone's interested in more like a conservation science. So there are conservation scientists and conservators working there in Ottawa. Algonquin College, I had a little bit of trouble with their conservation link, but I think you should be able to get into it through this one. And then perhaps it was just the day I was trying, right? But there's another program there, and then of course AGO Conservation, if you want to see more about us and our colleagues and some of the stories or the some of the things that we've written, you can find them through that link.
Cool. I see that we have actually one question has come through, and it's, have you ever had a reconstruction go wrong where something was damaged, and what do you do in a situation like that?
So where we've damaged it?
Or just that where damage has happened?
No.
Or when you've damaged it, although maybe you don't want to share that.
No, I don't think I've ever, to be honest. We work really quite slowly and meticulously, and we spend a lot of time in conversation with others and consultation before we even touch something. So we always have a treatment plan before we get into it. That really helps avoiding damage. Yes. But sure, I mean, we do have objects that have arrived damaged in some way, sometimes through transportation where they weren't packed properly, sometimes through handling. Most of the time it's, and sometimes actually we've had to deal with very deliberate damage in the terms of vandalism. So
okay.
It depends very much on what's wrong. If it's tagging, that, and depending upon the surface or the material that's been tagged, that could be any number of, it depends very much. It's a very difficult question to answer. I'm not trying to avoid it, but it's really hard to answer. For instance, there was this a work that arrived and it was being shipped and it arrived damaged, and it was a very innocent thing. It just, a connection broke and it fell off, right? It was a very innocent thing. It was nobody's fault. I don't even think they could have known that it would have happened. So it's just then taking that and figuring out why it occurred and then just reversing that with a new mount. So it can be very simple. It can be extraordinarily complicated where we've actually had to rebuild something. But in that case, with contemporary, we usually have the artist to work with, and that's a wonderful thing. So we'll work in concert together to figure it out.
Very good. Okay, so thank you, Sherry and Sjoukje. We are at our time. We finished. So thank you everybody very much for joining us for this this talk today. I think I feel like I have a million more questions about conservation. So hopefully one day soon we'll all be able to get together and chat a little bit more about these. But until then, everybody have a great rest of your day, and I hope you stay well. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.